Welcome to the Executive Innovation Show podcast, where we bring you real executive conversations with industry game changers and thought leaders. We ask the questions you're thinking, what you're scared to ask, and we make your brain hurt afterward. With your host, Carrie Chitsey Wells, co-founder and CEO of One Touch Video Chat, live video interviews, and the nonprofit Humans Helping Humans.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast. We're going to talk about, is the growth in physician entrepreneurs stemming from the physician experience? And so happy to have a great guest with us today. Have Dr. Arlen Meyers, who's a professor at the University of Colorado Denver School of Medicine, a lecturer at the UC Denver Business School, and president and CEO of the Society for Physician Entrepreneurs. Dr. Meyers, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, great. We've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about today. And prior to you founding the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, you were actually a practicing ENT physician for over 30 years. So you've seen both sides of the physician of actually practicing in a clinical environment, and then the entrepreneur side, and even teaching kind of the new up and coming entrepreneurs. What have you seen really driving growth in physicians wanting to be entrepreneurs outside of the medical four walls over the last few years?
Well, there's a number of different reasons or things that are driving global physician entrepreneurship, but I think the top three probably have to do with fear, greed, and necessity. Fear is about the changing environment and what's going to happen to me as a doctor. Greed is about, gee, will I be able to protect my income given all the changes, reimbursement policy, et cetera?
Right.
And necessity is, in some instances, physicians are disabled, they get divorced, their residency contract is not renewed, they're a foreign trained physician that relocates to the United States and can't really practice medicine. So there's really a lot of, and then there's the innovation imperative by necessity, which is innovate or die. So I think those are the top three. There's many, many more. And then my own personal story is another motivator.
So tell us the personal story. What's the motivator?
Well, the short version is, as you said, I was an academic ear, nose, and throat surgeon for 40 years. I'm an emeritus at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and other affiliates. But a bunch of things sort of coalesced around an experience where myself and several other colleagues invented a gadget that optically detects cancer.
Nice.
And without going through all the gory details, what that experience taught me was every surgeon, doctor, health professional, scientist, engineer has a good idea. They have absolutely positively no idea what to do with it, including me when I came up with this gadget. And it's very unusual if a medical school or a graduate school or an engineering school teaches you what to do with it. So there's a big gap between having an idea and knowing what to do with it so that you can get it to a patient. And that's really what motivated what I'm doing now.
That's awesome. And it's kind of funny because over the last month or two, just talking to a bunch of physicians for the podcast, I've seen more and more physicians that were practicing and, still maybe do some practicing to keep their license, but that have started, tech companies to solve real world patient issues that they were seeing. And with the move away from, the fee for service and going more to the value care model and, the six system model and that kind of thing. And then looking at all the constraints on insurance and billing and all of that kind of stuff from that perspective, where are you seeing, these physicians that are trying to, help change a model that is broken or is breaking, however you want to put it? Where are you seeing the most kind of rise in what physicians are wanting to do to really kind of impact change versus maybe what we saw 10 years ago?
So I think that the two most attractive options for most grunts in the trenches are digital health and care delivery models.
Yeah, no doubt.
And just to back up a minute, the incentive for pursuing physician entrepreneurship is really a push-pull phenomenon. The push is doctors are burned out, they're unhappy, they're grumpy, they're tired of the administrivia, they don't want to deal with all the changes, et cetera, et cetera. And the pull is there's so many opportunities to make a ridiculous system better that it's just almost impossible to ignore them.
Right.
So on the one hand, they're being pushed out. On the other hand, they're seeing everybody else doing this stuff. And it's also almost a social contagion phenomenon.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because there's no way but up. I mean, you can't.
Yeah, really. I mean, are there aspects to the American sick care system that are exceptional? Yes.
Right.
If you have a lot of money, if you have access to all the technology, I think our graduate medical education system is probably the envy of the world. So I don't want to make it seem like, this is ridiculous. We have a terrible system and we're like a third world country.
Yeah, no doubt.
There's so many opportunities for improvement that you just can't ignore them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that leads me to, you wrote an article back in 2016, drivers of international physician entrepreneurship. And it's funny to me how relevant it is today. It's as if you wrote it last week. But one of the things that you talk about is the generational demands. And as we see these new groups of millennials and, our future Gen Zs that are coming out of med school that are cut from more of an entrepreneurial cloth and, philanthropists wanting to do good and kind of give back and grew up on tech innovation. How do you see that changing? Does that have folks coming out of medical school not even practicing medicine, or do we see them being more innovative with healthcare technology companies? What do you think's on the horizon from that?
Well, what's interesting is that, this idea of generational differences, Peter Drucker, way back when, he wrote a very interesting and oft-cited article called 7 Sources of Opportunity and Innovation. And one of them is generational differences. So this is not something I made up. I mean, this has been around for a long time.
Right.
Another aspect of this is it's a misconception that entrepreneurs in general, let alone in medicine, are 23-year-old college dropouts in a hoodie in a co-working space. That's really not actually how it works. In fact, if you look at the data, the average age of an entrepreneur is about 45. A lot of the big, the more successful entrepreneurs have a PhD or a technical background. And 25% of new business startups are done by people over the age of 55. So the bottom line is that entrepreneurship spans it spans every generation.
Right.
And what people are finding is that when you intermingle the generations and you have younger people working with so-called older people, that both benefit and actually the outcomes are improved. So you're seeing a lot of intergenerational entrepreneurship platforms, and you're seeing a lot of diversity entrepreneurship platforms. And then there's the counter where, just yesterday, for example, I visited a co-working space that for all intents and purposes only allows women entrepreneurs. Now, I can understand it's sort of a Me Too, we work kind of thing.
Right.
But I can understand the motivation. But frankly, I think they're cutting off their nose to spite their face. I don't think that's a good idea.
You think that they should be, well, it would still let them have male employees, right?
Well, that's another interesting aspect of it. So I asked them, so are you going to let like me in? If I wanted to rent space, they said, well, we have a couple of men. I forgot what she called me, but I can understand how women would feel, because that's how I felt.
Yeah.
Like, no, we don't want you here. This is just like all women place. So I can understand why women get aggravated when they've had to put up with that for 300 millennia or whatever they've had to do. So
right.
But the bottom line is productivity, and actually the business case for diversity is pretty strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you don't do that, you're really just sacrificing your profits.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think there's just so much hype around women entrepreneurs and raising capital and, all that kind of stuff. I can see both sides of that coin, right?
There's also a manpower issue, and by manpower I mean medical students, residents, fellows, and people that go out into practice. And the headline is that more and more medical students are just going to medical school to get their MD with no intention of doing a residency and no intention of practicing medicine, but rather pursuing a bio-entrepreneurial career, whether it's a startup or working for another company. Yeah. And that creates significant issues.
So let's talk about that. In specialty medicine and rural areas, there's a lot of provider shortage, as well as folks coming out of medical school don't want to live in small town USA. And so that increases the shortage in those areas. To your point of folks coming out of medical school with no intention to practice, as folks look at those numbers and see what our shortages are going to be over the next 5 years, do you think that's being taken into consideration of looking at how many people are graduating med school and who are actually going to practice? And what do you see with that? How do you see that kind of working? Is the shortage greater than estimated?
Well, the trends that I see are, first of all, how do we train people to win the fourth industrial revolution? So the curriculum, the process, the structure of medical school, in my opinion, needs to be totally rethought. We need a Flexner 2.0. That is, we need to rethink how we do medical education. Secondly, it's called physician entrepreneur for a reason. And just because you graduate with an MD doesn't mean you're a physician. It means you're a person with an MD that maybe they'll call you a doctor.
Right.
So unless you have some experience, it's pretty unlikely that you're really going to get much credibility. The other point is that in terms of the physician shortage, I actually don't believe that there's going to be as large a physician shortage as all the so-called pundits are predicting, because I think the models of care are going to change so much that the required manpower, the most typical and off-cited example are robots and AI. So, one guy's saying 80% of the doctors are going to go away. I don't think it's going to be that big, but there certainly will be a different manpower requirement in the fourth industrial revolution. As far as your point of rural care, essentially entrepreneurship now in the digital economy happens anywhere. And this business of it being focused on clusters and innovation districts and large cities, again, I think is sort of, it is a reality. 75% of the venture money goes to 3 cities.
Right.
But more and more, we're seeing entrepreneurial activities that are data-driven, that can be done offline, that can be done remotely, basically in your pajamas from your living room, and it doesn't make any difference where that is. So I think that's going to change as well. However, when a medical student or a pre-med is interviewing and they respond to the question, why do you want to be a doctor? They come back and say, well, first of all, they're not going to say it because they're too smart, but their thinking is, I don't want to be a doctor. I just want the MD for the credibility and the credentials so I can start a biotech company or a digital health startup.
Right.
So the question then is, would you admit that student? My argument is, I think we need to take the best available athlete and give them the training and education they need to do whatever they need to do to contribute to user-defined value. The other side of the coin is, no. We're a state-supported medical school. We have a mandate to create primary care physicians to care for the citizens of the state. If you tell us you don't want to practice medicine, we're not going to draft you.
Right.
So I don't think that's helpful. So what I'm proposing is, let's be honest. let's open the kimono. Let's realize that the medical students who are coming into medical school now have different generational attitudes and demands, and we should provide them with the curriculum and the training that they need to do what they want to do, which is bio-entrepreneurship. So I've proposed alternative medical school training and curriculum. I've proposed eliminating the MD, MBA for an MBE, Masters in Bio-Entrepreneurship. I've proposed a totally different curriculum for those that want to pursue that career track and then have the traditional clinical career track.
I think that's smart. I mean, I think, we can't put everybody in the same bucket. Some folks, since they're a child, have wanted to be a practicing doctor. And some people want to, tend to be more, technology driven or wanting to solve some of the issues that we face that want to understand and get all the ins and outs of medicine, but actually not have to see patients.
Well, the organizational psychologists tell us that the best predictor of job satisfaction, amongst other things, is an adequate job preview. In other words, what is a day in the life of this job like?
Right.
And no one, including me, when you're a pre-med, has any clue what it's like being a doctor until you're a practicing physician.
Yeah. Well, and with that doctor-patient relationship changing with all the digital technology out there, and then looking at changing from the sick care system to more preventative, that role of the doctor is still changing and it's going to continually be changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that change fatigue is another driver of physician entrepreneurship. They're just getting tired. They're getting burned out. They're depressed. Unfortunately, they kill themselves. I mean, there's all kinds of toxic behavior that goes on. So I think people basically are looking for plan B when it comes to entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Well, there was one thing that you said to me that just really resonated with me. And I know you've written about this and so forth. And it was really your thinking about physician experience. And as companies roll out new models, new technology, kind of taking a step back and saying, hey, I'm the physician. What's in it for me? How am I going to get adoption? And you used an acronym QWILT, QWILT. I thought it was really awesome. Can you walk everybody through this acronym, kind of what it means and how you came up with it?
Sure. So again, the consumer researchers tell us that happy employees make happy customers.
Absolutely.
Well, it's no different in medicine. I mean, grumpy doctors make grumpy patients. Not only that, grumpy doctors hurt patients more than happy doctors. And that's been shown over and over again. So if we're going to assume that that's a correct assumption, then what you need to do is focus. I mean, 99% of what I read and everybody's talking about is about the patient experience.
Right.
We really should, I'm not saying ignore it, because God knows it needs to be better, but we need to have an equal focus on the doctor experience. Yes. So how do we make doctors happier? Now, it's being termed the joy of medicine, returning the joy of medicine, et cetera, et cetera. But my idea of this QWILT thing is that when you come up with a product or service that you're trying to integrate into a system or overcome the barriers to dissemination and implementation, from the physician perspective, they basically want you to do a couple things. And that's where the QWILT, and actually I now call it the QWILT set. And that means, so the Q is will your product or service improve the quality of care as I define it? The W is, will your product or service interfere with my workflow as I do it now? Because I'm not changing. Right. I do what I do now because that's what I do, and you're not going to change that unless it's so radical that I have to. The I is, what's in it for me? I mean, how do I benefit from incorporating whatever it is you're trying to sell or integrate into what I do with my life? Do I make more money? Just how does this work? What's in it for me? The L is, how will your product increase or decrease my exposed to malpractice or other liability, whether it's product liability, whether it's referral liability, whether it's medical malpractice liability. how am I going to be able to cover my behind if I use your product?
Right.
And finally, and then there's the T, which is time, which is probably the most important thing doctors have. And most doctors actually say that if you're going to expect me to use something, and the electronic medical record is the classic, bête noire now. If you expect me to use something, don't allow it. I don't want to have to spend more time doing it. In fact, I want to save time so I can spend more time talking to my patients or taking care of them. That's what most doctors say. Then finally, the last one is SET, S-E-T, which is, will your product or service do the job I want it to do? And the S-E-T is the social job, the emotional job, and the technical job. Because every product, if you're going to have a product market fit, has to satisfy the job that needs to be done. And typically, that's a technical job, an emotional job, and a social job.
Right. No, it's great. I totally love that. So I have a question, putting your physician ENT hat back on for a second. Two of your letters, the I and the T, one is what's in it for the physician, and the next one's time. And those to me correlate very closely. So as you look at, whether you're going into a physical, putting your physician hat on for a second and speaking from, a ton of the physicians that we talk to, you're going into a, maybe it's an office, maybe it's clinical rounds, maybe it's whatever it is, right? You're all over the place. You're making potentially less money because of, billing changes and so forth. Walk me through, what are the top things when you say that, in it for me and time? I know you gave an example, but if you're a physician, I'm assuming it could be time with the family. It could be time to do, another business. It could be just peace of mind and chilling on the couch, right? Putting your physician, what does that mean to you?
The answer, in my view, the answer depends on your stage of development as a physician.
Right.
What you want out of this is a lot different if you're a medical student, a resident, a fellow, a practitioner that's been out 5 years, someone who's in their prime of their life, like between 45 and 65. If 65 is the new, 80, whatever. And then there's the older, there's the more senior physician.
Yeah.
So if you look at somebody like me, who's kind of the old and the grumpy, and there's been a lot written about, so people at my stage of life, what do they want? Well, Daniel Pink has sort of written about, basically mastery, independence, and purpose. And that's what people in my generation who've done what I did are kind of looking for at their stage of life. Now, people who are 47 years old, they're still paying off medical school debt. They have 3 kids. They have a trophy spouse. They have a house in Vail. They have all kinds of expectations. Their goals are different.
Right.
And we've talked about what medical students and sort of residents want. They're afraid. So they want security. So it goes to the Hertzberg hierarchy of needs thing. So I think it just depends on your stage of life and what trips your trigger and what you think entrepreneurship will satisfy.
No, that's awesome. Makes total sense. Well, it has been so great to have you on the show. Dr. Arlen Meyers does a great job putting content and a lot of stuff for Society of Entrepreneurs. Click on the link in the show notes to learn more on what he's up to. Follow him on Twitter at ArlenMD. It's been so great to have you on the show. Feel free if you have any comments or questions for myself or Dr. Meyers, feel free to leave those and always subscribe to the podcast. Thanks so much for being on the show. It has been such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, and I'll see you at soapnet.org, SOPEnet.org.
There you go. Get it in. All right. Thanks so much.
Okay.
This podcast has come to a close. To hear more from the Executive Innovation Show podcast, subscribe, submit questions, and share the love. Follow us on social. We're everywhere.